seats. So Natasha taught us a little bit earlier this evening that we will stand on the protocol that's already been established. However, I do want to make a special mention of Dr. Sanji Monacheng, who's our ambassador to South Africa and Botswana. I also want to make a special mention to our retired ambassador, Tandiwe January McLean. I also want to make a special mention to our esteemed hosts of Vuyolethu's Haven, who have brought us here tonight and who have made tonight a reality. And I also want to really acknowledge the leaders in the disability and education sector, educators, caregivers in the room, parents in the room, above all, our extraordinary children and young people living with autism. I want us to give them I want us to give Zama in particular a round of applause. And the reason why for that, ladies and gentlemen, is that even without living with autism, when I was young, Zama's age, being on a panel with adults at an event like this would be incredibly intimidating. But she wasn't intimidated. She rose her flag, and she really closed off with a voice from people living with autism. And that for me, I think, is incredibly important, because it's important that we don't talk of people, we don't talk about them, but we talk with them about their lived experiences. And that, for me, is one of the incredible things about Vuyolethu's Haven, is that they've made an effort to say, even in our board, even in our organization, we want to hear your voice. We don't want to talk about you, we want to talk with you, and we want to be led by you. And so that is really, really excellent. So good evening. It's truly a pleasure to join you tonight at the Champions of Change Gala during this Autism Awareness Month, as we celebrate courage, commitment, and the collective journey towards inclusive education in South Africa. Let me begin also by thanking Vuyolethu's Haven for your leadership in organizing this important event. You remind us that creative and inclusive society does not begin or end in boardrooms or in a policy document. It begins with love, and sometimes it begins with a painful story. It begins with passion, but it's often really ignited by a real lived experience and with advocacy and deep belief in limitless potential for every single child. So, siyanhalalisela, siyanbulela ngomsebenzi wenu, sithi ngana ningaqhubeka nisenza kakhulu. And so tonight, we are here to celebrate, but more than that, we are also here to reflect, recommit, recognize the very real work that lies ahead in ensuring that children with special learning needs not only are included, but are embraced. Natasha said it's not just about inclusion, but it's also being embraced. But for me, I want to take it a step forward. It's not just being about embraced, but it's about being empowered and uplifted by our education system. And it was incredibly insightful for me to listen to the panel discussion from an academic point of view, from a parent's point of view, from a person living with autism's point of view, even from the network of fathers. And just listening and hearing these stories has been really enriching for me personally, and has really reignited the commitment and the yearn that I have that we have to do better as the South African government in being able to say, what are we doing, what more can we do for inclusive education in our country? Because our children, all of them, are protected by the Constitution, their rights are immediately realizable, and we owe it to them. It's a matter of constitutional obligation. It is not a nice to have, but it is something that we owe all children in South Africa, to be able to say, we will provide you with quality education that caters for your needs. We're not going to ask you to pigeonhole yourself into an education system we've designed. Our education system must be responsive to you and your needs, and that becomes incredibly important. Ladies and gentlemen, we know this, that for far too long, and this was mentioned during the panel discussion, for far too long in our communities, children who live with physical and cognitive disabilities have been condemned to a life of shame. They spend their days hidden away in a bedroom. Ubaba, who was speaking here, I think from the network of fathers, was saying it's far more complicated than that you want to protect your child, but at the same time you also want to protect yourselves. And so for far too long, our children remained hidden, wanting to say the visitors are coming, put the child in the bedroom. And I'm saying today that gone are those days. Now we want to embrace all our children. We want to embrace all our children, because I can tell you with certainty that having been around the country for the past 10 months visiting various schools and visiting various special schools with schools where there are children with special needs, I can tell you how incredibly talented those people are. I have gone to special schools where I've seen children get a skill, develop things, whether it's in robotics or things with their hands. But ladies and gentlemen, those people do not deserve to be locked away in a bedroom. They deserve to be elevated, embraced, and empowered, and they deserve to live a life of dignity. And that is what we're going to do, and that is what we are going to do from now on. And so, as a Department of Basic Education, we are taking bold steps to move from intent to action. It's very, very important, and chief among these efforts has been the establishment of the Ministerial Task Team on Inclusive Education. Because of course, as was really communicated here by our panel, and including the panelists from the University of Johannesburg, that there's a lot that is unknown about inclusive education, about children living either with neurodiversity or children with special needs. There's a lot that is unknown. There's particularly a lot that is unknown amongst policymakers and lawmakers. And so it's important that we bring together experts who can advise and say, well, these are some of the things that the education system is doing that is failing children. This is what you can do to be better responsive. And so I really look forward to the work of this task team. They've been at it for some time, and we do anticipate that in the next year they'll be able to deliver a product to us that will help us reshape our education system. But we haven't just really stopped there. And I mean, what I like about this task team is that it brings together educators, therapists, psychologists, policymakers, advocates, and importantly, people living with disabilities themselves. Because we firmly believe that nothing about us without us. And so this task team is currently conducting this comprehensive review of how we can implement inclusive education in South Africa. Their work is focused on identifying on what is working, where we are falling short, and what must be urgently done to ensure that learners with special needs are no longer excluded from the promise of a good quality education. And so perhaps this might make me a very bad politician, ladies and gentlemen, but I do believe that even as a government, you must acknowledge where things have not always gone wrong, where things have not always gone right, where you have failed, where there are areas of improvement. And I can say with certainty that a lot has been achieved in our basic education system, but a lot more can be done when it comes to being inclusive in our basic education system for our children. And I'm very pleased to see that over the past 2 years, at least the 2 financial years, there's been an increase in funding for inclusive education in our budget. It's important that we put our money where our mouth is, that we're not just talking about intent, but we're also talking about action, and tangible action. And as many of you here in this room would know, who are advocates in this sector, you would know that this requires investment. Whether it's investment in infrastructure, whether it's investment in the requisite curriculum, whether it's investment in the requisite staffing in a school. We had a teacher from a school here, and he can certainly tell you that they have a special cohort of teachers who teach learners with special needs. And so that requires investment, but that requires a government that recognizes that we have not always been good at doing this, and we need to do better. We haven't been always good at providing this level of access. We have to do better. We haven't been always good at being more inclusive. We've got to do better. And I'm saying to you that we've recognized that this is an Achilles heel for us, and we have to do better. Inclusion is not a favor, it is a right. And inclusion is not just about placing a learner principal in the classroom. It's about providing that learner with the resources, the teaching support, the emotional safety, and the opportunity to thrive. We must remember that when we educate a child with special learning needs, we're not just simply helping them learn to read, write, and count. We are building their confidence, their communication, and their self-expression. And most importantly, we are helping them build a life of dignity. I was saying to Omama earlier before we came in, that my dream is to one day make sure that every single child who goes to a school with special needs is able to leave that school having acquired a skill with a certificate that says this is the skill I've acquired, so that they may be able to go and apply for a job one day, so that they can be independent, they can earn a living, but most importantly, live a life of dignity. And it's possible. And so education must be a springboard to jobs, to independence, to creativity and participation in society. And this means that special schools must be equipped and trained to welcome learners who are differently abled. That is the future we're working towards, one where no one child is left behind. Behind every child living with autism is often a village. We heard Ayanda, who was speaking here a little bit earlier, is often a village of support. Be it parents, be it grandparents who are sitting there on the table there, be it caregivers who are around this room, be it siblings, teachers, therapists. And so tonight, I want to honor you. I want to say siyabulela for looking after our children. Please give yourself a round.